So the body is pretty much finished. I've trimmed off the expanding foam there, ready for connecting the head. So the next thing to work out is the head itself. You can see here I've opened up the mouth even a bit more than what I'd originally intended on. The design that I'm going for has the mouth a lot more exposed. I'm using this one here as a reference picture. There is a fair bit of difference in the Gremlins between the first and second film, and this to me is one that's been sort of clearly based on the second film more than the first. In the first film, the mouth was a little bit smaller and the skin was a little bit more leathery. In the second film, the character is a bit more reptilian and a little bit more scaly looking across the surface. So I've been doing some experimentation on getting the eyes to look right, and I've been playing around with heating up some perspex and trying to get it to dome into the shape that I want it to be. I had some limited success with it by heating up perspex and using one of these wooden balls to bend it into that little tube piece. You can see one of the pieces there where I overheated the plastic and it bubbled on the surface, which removes the clarity of it, so that piece was no good. The next piece I did work quite well, and once I'd cut it down and done a test painting in it, what I came up with was that. And position wise it's going to do what I wanted to do, and I'll show you the technique that I used to paint the inside of that in a little bit. The biggest thing with that though is that whilst it's close to what I want, it's still not physically big enough to create the ball size, and when it's in there it's not completely filling the eye socket. The other thing that I found is that after doing a couple of these, the heat of the plastic started to distort the edge of that tube piece, and that meant that the curve that I was trying to get was less and less successful each time. So what I did was to make up this. This is basically just a couple of bits of wood that are spaced to the same thickness as the piece of plastic that goes in between them. And then I have a hole, which is the same size hole as the piece of plastic tube. And then I've just used one of those balls, flattened it off a little bit and super glued it into position so that closes down on top of the perspex. So from there, all I need to do is heat up a piece of it so that it's at the right temperature, press it down, let it cool, and it gives me this. And this is a lot closer in terms of the physical size that we're after when we're talking about getting that side-on profile so that it completely fills the eye socket in from behind. So let's talk about painting these eyes. I'm only using 4 basic colours. They're an acrylic-based paint. I have seen people do similar things to this using nail polish, and depending on the type of eye you want to create, sometimes the nail polishes are a better idea because they have the sparkles or a pearl effect basically built directly into the paint. In this instance though, I'm just using flat paints, and with just allowing a small amount of blending between the different colours, it'll give me the effect that I'm after. The other things that I'll be using is some bamboo skewers and some cotton tips, and I've also got a piece of stainless steel wire that I've sharpened a tip onto, but you could just as easily use a pin or a needle if that's all you've got access to. So I've got my little test piece that I did for reference. The easiest way to think about painting these things is you're sort of painting it in reverse. If that was the eyeball and I was just painting on the surface, I'd start with my base colour and then sort of move on to probably the yellow and then finish off with the black. In this instance, because we're painting it inside out, we literally have to do it the other way around. You really don't need very much in the way of paints to do this, and I found that just the bit that's left over in the cap is probably enough to just get started. You just want to blob it in place to get that iris started in just a rough line that you want to follow. Then you want to clean the tip off altogether. and then just use the sharp tip to sort of move the paint around so that you've got the sharp points that you want, and so that you pick up like a furriness on the edge. When the plastic's curved like this as well, you'll tend to get a lensing effect in it, so you'll need to check it from time to time, because you can see on that side it looks a lot bigger by comparison than it does on the other side. Now I need to dry that off and I can start on the next layer. This time I want to just pick up like a dotted edge around the outside, but because I've done that furry edge, I can just sort of follow it around, and I don't need to be that specific. I just need to not go too much outside the black. I'm sort of going over the top of the black, and it should fall between the lines that we've already created when we have a look at it on the other side. You can see there how it starts to pick up that edge. And you can see on the inside there it looks really rough, but if you position it correctly, you should be able to get that bleed through to get the effect that you're looking for. Once again, I need to dry that off, and I can hit it with the yellow. I'm using a hot air gun for the drying off of the paint, basically because I just don't want to wait for it to dry, but you could also just use a hairdryer or simply just wait for it to dry. And once again, I'm not really trying to stay with any sort of line, I'm just trying to move outside the level of the layer that I put down last. Like I did with the black, I want to make this layer a little bit thicker, because I want to feather it out in the same way as I did with the black. Okay, so that's getting close, so I'll clean that tip off again. And whilst that paint's still wet, I'll drag those edges out a bit, because this is where I sort of want it to blend into the next colour that comes in as well. And it might need just a little bit more, and just to make it a little bit more rounded, a little bit more cat's eyed looking. You don't need to worry too much if you overshoot with the paint. It's not a big deal, especially with using these skewers. You can literally just sort of flip it around and use the blunt end and push that paint back in if necessary. So you can see here, I think I've overshot these ones a little bit, so I'm just going to push them back in a little bit, and on the other side it needs to come out a little bit more. So that gives me that furry edge that I'm looking for. This time I am going to put a small amount of the red out, because I do need a little bit more of it by comparison. And because I'm picking out more of it, I'm using the cotton tip this time. And I just want to sort of splotch it around, starting from the outside and working in. I want to hold off from that crossover point sort of right till the last minute. And I want it to be deliberately blotchy. I don't want like a full-on even covering of one colour. And you want to be able to still see through it a little bit, where some areas of the paint are clearly thicker than the other. And then again, I want to come down and pick up over the top of that yellow layer. And generally the paint that's in there now is good enough to spread out. It's getting pretty close to what I'm after. So now what I'm going to do is dry that one more time and add a second layer of the yellow over the top of everything, so that some of that yellow sort of bleeds through the red. You can see there now how some of that little bit of yellow has sort of shined through, where it's maintained the red, but it also kind of looks a little orange in places. The next thing to do is to work out the veiny bits that are in the eye. In my little test piece, these bits I thought were a bit thick, hence the sharp piece of wire that I've got. And I'm just going to work from the yellow section out and scrape off that inner layer of paint so that it leaves some really fine lines there. Well, I realise that you can probably barely see them there, but the final layer is where this will get picked up. The last step of painting this now is to coat that entire surface with the black. You can start to see how it shows up those really fine line details. And once the paint's dry, I can backfill the hollow section of the eye with some of that epoxy putty. And I've just added in one of the sticks there just to make it a little easier to position the eye when I'm ready to glue it into place. So I need to fill in this mouth area so that I've got a framework to build up what I'm doing as far as the teeth is concerned. And what I'm going to use as a basis for that is this piece. It's a leftover vinyl piece of the base of a Terminator skull. I was never very happy with it in terms of the design of it, because it's very wobbly and distorted and out of shape. So when I did my version of it, I completely redid the base altogether, and this is a piece that's just been kicking around since then. It is, though, the same sort of vinyl material that the head's made from, so it should blend in really nicely, and it should glue together quite well as well once I've cut a piece to shape. So I've just put a light black wash over him just to give you a better idea of what his details look like. I think I've been able to blend the head and neck in fairly well. You can hardly see the difference. And the small amount of sculpting that I've done there, I've sort of blended it quite nicely. I'm not going to be doing the final paint on this guy until I've worked out what I'm doing with the articulated version. So as I said, this guy is going to act as my size and design reference. And there's a couple of areas on his body where I may need to press off a mould to get the shape of a claw or some of the scale areas. Most of the sculpt will be done by hand, but having him basically raw and unpainted gives me that option if I need to work on specific areas. So that's pretty much as far as this guy's going to be going for now. So that'll be the update for this time, guys. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.